Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston, psychologist.
And I'm Tara Prisco, physician assistant. All right, we ready?
As I said before, as ready as I will ever be.
You do anything good this weekend?
What did I do this weekend? Did some work. I was supposed to do stuff around my house and I didn't.
Same.
And went to brunchies with my friends Marcia and Dana, they're listeners. Hey girls.
Nice. Hello, ladies.
And then I went up to my mom's house because I was in search of black vodka for an upcoming cocktail. And the interwebs informed me that it was for sale near a liquor store near my mom's house. So I drove the hour to her house to find out they do not, in fact, sell it there. So I will not be using black vodka in my upcoming cocktail. It's okay. The cocktail said you can use regular vodka. So we will all survive. No worries.
We will all survive, but
we'll all get through this.
Maybe
tragedy.
Somebody out there knows a source and can quickly let us know.
Well, I think that they make it in Canada, so I think that's part of the difficulty. Or they make it in another country. For some reason, Canada keeps popping in my head. But that's why it's hard to find in the U.S.
Okay.
And it has nothing to do with tariffs. It was always hard to find in the U.S. It's probably just more expensive now.
I'm sure. Not sure if you can see on my face, on my nose, this little red spot right there.
No, I'm scared. It's not measles, is it?
I'm going to go closer. It is not measles.
Okay.
Okay.
What is it?
So I had a very packed weekend, including taking my...
Wait, did you get hit in the face during your dance?
No, not that. Not quite. This is better or worse. So I took my eldest and some friends of hers to a trampoline park for her birthday. And one of her friends we know can do a back tuck and was just having a mental block and whatever. And I was like, all right, if you do a backflip,
no, I don't like
I'll do a backflip.
No.
So I made it 3/4 of the way around. It's just that my face kind of...
You are elderly now. You should not be doing back tucks.
Yeah, well, apparently I cannot fully do that.
You can't get the full rotation anymore.
No, I made about 3/4 of the way around, and then my face sort of scraped, and I lost a little skin off my nose.
You know what? You got a good story to tell about it.
And there is a video, but that will not be shared.
I need to see it. I won't share it, I promise, but I need to see it.
All right, I'll send it to you after.
Awesome.
Or I should send it to you now so that you can have a reaction.
I mean, I'm going to have a reaction regardless.
Let me text it to you right this moment so you can have a live on screen reaction to me falling in my face.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
I have to flip
you
through
know, I'm nothing but spontaneous.
All right, here we go.
And it sounded way more sarcastic than it needed to be. I do
right
agree.
now.
Spontaneity. I'm waiting. Nothing has come through yet.
The magical internet did not.
Oh, what? Oh,
there
okay, here we go. I'm about to view it. Okay, I see. I'm just going to give our listeners an idea. You're at some sort of trampoline park, and you are standing alone on a trampoline, looking very excited to try this. Giant smile, arms out, ready to go, braced for impact. And she's up, and she's jumping, and she's jumping. She's gaining momentum, kind of tilting to the left. And but why did the phone go down as soon as
Because my daughter who was recording it was laughing so hard that she kind of saw the impact about to happen, and she phone went down.
Your dignity. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. It's not as bad as I thought. I think when you were talking, even though you said it, I was picturing you on like solid ground.
Yeah, no, trampoline.
About that
but
impact.
It's more about the skin just kind of scraped off my face.
That's fair. Sometimes skin gets scraped off your face and you live to tell the tale.
I'm here and I didn't break anything. I was afraid I was going to my neck or something.
No, don't put that bad juju out there.
Yeah,
no.
we're all intact.
Yeah, everyone's fine. Everyone's fine.
Just keep me in a bubble and tell me to stop thinking I'm young.
Yeah. Well, we're not young, but that doesn't mean we're old. We're
right.
not young.
And there was no alcohol involved either. It was just me getting caught up in the excitement of kids and trampolines, apparently.
I've told people that before. Some of my best moments, and the best is in quotations, have been not involving alcohol. So,
Yeah.
It's a thing.
So we'll start to kind of segue into today's.
You're not supposed to say you're going to segue. You're just supposed to do it.
We're supposed to say segue.
No, you're just supposed to do it.
So I haven't sipped my drink yet. My drink.
Wait. So we're working on the perfect cocktail.
Yes.
As if you've been following along. And so I got a different mixer that was purple.
Okay.
It's far more purple in the bottle. I did use a lot of ice, so that's probably why it's lighter now.
Mm-hmm.
But another possibility if that other one doesn't flesh out.
You don't want to tell us what it is?
It's just a lavender lemon drop. It's very similar. It was just pre-bottled mix versus the infused mix. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Nothing special.
So my drink is very blue and sort of cloudy and has pretty...
You're really dialing back on that not drinking green thing.
It's blue, but yes.
But you mixed it to get that color.
Yeah. So I'm all for it now. Blue Curacao and I are friends. We're okay.
And we've documented it on this
I
podcast.
know. You've seen my overcoming my fear of blue drinks.
You heard it here, folks, guys.
medicalmediamixer. We can do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got coconut on it. So it is called the Snowflake.
Ooh.
So let me tell you the ingredients. Well, first you take honey. Our honey was crystallized, so I used agave. Mm-hmm. And you sort of use that to rim your glass, and then you dip it in some sweetened coconut flakes and make it all stick on there so that you can get that pretty snow-like rim. And then in a shaker, you use, let me get my exact measurements here. All right, there we go. 2 1/4 ounces of vodka, 3/4 of an ounce of blue curacao, 3 ounces of pineapple juice, and 2 tablespoons of cream of coconut. And you shake it a lot because that coconut is like that thick, creamy stuff to get it incorporated. And you strain it into your pretty glass. So I have to take a sip and see, but I imagine it tastes good.
Sounds good.
It's very good. It's very tropically. I'm just going to be shedding coconut flakes and eating them as we go.
Okay. That's okay. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to eat the snow as long as it's not yellow.
Yes, no yellow snow, people.
Or red snow. Given what you're talking about.
Yes, true. That too.
Spoiler alert. Sorry.
So when I'm the particular media piece that I'm going to be using is the movie Society of the Snow, which was a Netflix dramatization movie. And it's the same story has been told a couple different ways, but this particular one is on Netflix. It's in Spanish. I watched it, with subtitles, not dubbed or anything.
Watch it on Espanol?
Yeah, well, with subtitles, I can read it. Yep.
Didn't you take Spanish in high school?
Yeah, but I mean, that's a whole lot of my language skills are not.
Was it Miss Figueroa that taught you? She would be so disappointed.
She was one. Yeah, she was one of the teachers. Yeah. Actually, no, she was probably the only one I had. No, actually, my first year I had the other one who I don't remember her name. If Sheila's listening though, she'll remember because she used to call the heater the register.
Okay.
But anyway, in 2023, this came out on Netflix, Society of the Snow, and it's really well done. I did not watch the original Alive, which was in the 90s. I think it was just like I was not at the right age for it. And when I looked it up,
it was really marketed towards our
No.
demographic at that
Yeah,
time.
we were kind of young at the time. And when I looked it up to look at the two movies on like Rotten Tomatoes, that was like rated like 60% and this was in the 90s. So I was like, all right, I'll watch the one that's considered good. But part of what inspired me, actually, Morbid had done an episode of this as well. So episode 638 of Morbid podcast, they followed, and they reviewed the entire true story of this. And from what I can tell, this movie, Society of the Snow, is pretty spot on as far as accuracy of everything that happened. So if you haven't heard of this legendary flight, this is Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, which crashed in the Andes Mountains in 1972. And they were carrying a rugby team among other people. And there are a couple documentaries as well. I feel like I have seen some of the documentaries, but I can't recall which of them. So I did tag a couple of them, but I don't remember which ones I watched back.
I feel like I watched part of a documentary, but it was like on in the background. And like I knew enough periphery of the story that like it was just something like you ever like have something on in the background that you kind of already know and you're not really focused. It was something like that. So it was like,
exactly.
I was supposed to be learning more about it, but I really didn't because I've retained nothing other than rugby team, Andes, crash, cannibalism.
Right. And that's the big thing it's known for. But there's so much more to it that's a small piece of what they did. So this is the date of the departure of this flight was October 12th, 1972. And it was a chartered flight by the Old Christians Club, which is a Uruguayan amateur rugby team. And they were traveling from Montevideo, Uruguay to Santiago, Chile for a match. And I remember them saying like, they all packed sort of warm weather clothing because Santiago, Chile would be more of a beach area. So I don't think they were prepared, obviously, for this. There were passengers and crew totaled 45 people. So 40 passengers and 5 crew members were on board. So the flight originally departed, but was forced to land in Mendoza, Argentina due to poor weather conditions over the Andes. So then the next day they actually retook off again from there. So they left about 2:18 p.m. and at approximately 3:34 p.m., the aircraft crashed into the Andes Mountains due to navigational errors and poor visibility. So there was a very specific way that they needed to go between these certain peaks and come out on the other side. And I think because of the storm, and I'm not sure if there was inexperience with the pilots or it was just a particularly bad storm, that they hit the mountain instead of going through between these two peaks. And immediately 12 individuals died from the crash impact, some of which you'll see the plane breaks into 2 major sections and the whole back of the plane just sucks people out as it comes off. Day 2, basically, once they all sort of come to, 5 more passengers succumbed to injuries and exposure during that first night. So now we're already down to 28 from 45 survivors. And then this is kind of a timeline. It's hard because I'm trying to remember the timeline along with adding in the fun details. But basically,
all the fun details. So much fun in this.
Well,
story.
You know what it is? These were young men. I mean, that were the majority of these. And they really did sort of take control in a good way and try and teamwork and try and take care of their own. Like it was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of smart thinking by fairly young individuals.
So how young are we talking? Like teenagers?
Early 20s. Some was in med schools. They were all kind of like at that point of life, finishing that college era and moving on to the next things. So they were all adults, but ranging from like 18 into their 20s. And there were some family members and other people along the way. So one of the survivors, Nando Parado, his sister actually ended up dying on day 9. So we've kind of jumped from day 2 to day 9 on just this timeline that I'm following. And then,
well, I imagine there's not a ton of stuff happening on those days, especially those first few days where there's just kind of figure out like, okay, where are we? How do we try to get help? How do we survive in the meantime? Like there's probably just a lot of sitting and trying to strategize.
Exactly. You know, looking through the belongings, looking through what luggage they had with them because the plane got cut in 2, sort of half the plane is missing with some luggage in that. They did, I think, right before the pilot died, he told them that there was a radio battery in the other piece of the plane. So part of what they do is they do try and a few of the guys try and make it to climb up the mountain, sort of where the other piece of the plane is left up top. Mm-hmm. To try and get things. And I think it took them 2 tries. Like they ended up having to come back and then do it again because they couldn't manage to get up there. I mean, they're all injured in various ways. They're obviously dealing with the cold. There's the snow everywhere. There's not one piece of vegetation. There's literally nothing but snow and rock. So as far as food goes, they're looking through the bags to see if there's anything. I mean, there's very little candies, a little nothing, snack, there's nothing. And even that they ration.
Those youngins who are listening, I'm sure you're thinking, this is giving Yellow Jackets. Yellow Jackets is a new show. A lot of that stuff about the plane crash and survival was taken from these true stories. So
Right.
They didn't make that stuff up. It was real life situations that it was based on.
Right. It's kind of like Survivor as well. Mm-hmm. And that's Survivor. Is that what it's called? No. What's the one with is it Survivor? The one.
I'm a survivor. No. Sorry, wrong one.
What is it? The one with the plane? No. It was on the same time as Heroes. Oh my goodness. Brain. Lost. There you go. Lost.
No, it was not called Brain. It was called Lost. Yes, a single word.
We need to make a drinking game actually during the podcast that every time Tara can't think of something and like just randomly saying words and Nicole has to guess what's in my brain, you take a drink
we're
because
really
you
good
definitely.
I feel like we know each other long enough that like I can guess.
I know,
what
but
you're thinking.
like it happens almost every episode that I'm like, the thing,
And I do know. Inevitably, I do know. I may not know immediately, but I will know.
Oh my goodness. So, I mean, they're using everything they can, clothing, wrapping their feet, wrapping their faces. One of the guys had fashioned some sort of sunglasses from things he had because you can get snow blindness when they were trying to trek out and find the other end of the plane.
I'm laughing because when you said fashion, I pictured he was like, fashion. Cannibalism, but make it fashion. That's what I pictured. Sorry.
Now, of course, in the way I did my notes, I don't know why, because I used ChatGPT to organize it, and it doesn't tell me the exact date that they decided to actually resort to cannibalism. But it was
ChatGPT are in a monogamous but very intense relationship.
Yeah. So, well, I gave it my notes and said to organize it, but I lost what date they decided to eat the bodies. But essentially, what happened is the suggestion is made. I don't remember exactly how far in, but I'm going to say probably at least a week in, around there, that we should probably use what we have. We have nothing to eat. The bodies are frozen, so they're preserved, and at this point, we either just slowly die because of starvation, because we can drink water, right? We can eat snow, but we have no nutrition. And these were young, muscular men, most of them. But again, they have no body fat. They're very athletic. They're just wasting away here. And there's a certain point, which we'll get to, that your body just physically cannot go any longer without nutrition. I believe in the way they showed it in the movie, and I'm not sure if this exactly is what occurred in real life, but there was certain people who were sort of holding out because of religious and moral and ethical reasons. But eventually they all really came around because they said, what's the point then? What's the point if we can't survive? We're just going to die. We're trying to get saved. So
that begs the question, would you eat me if we were stranded somewhere?
I mean, if you already died, yes.
No, I'm still living, and
I'm not going to start chopping body parts off if you're alive.
You just did a Mike Tyson and just bit my ear off and chomped on that sucker.
There wasn't one thing in the show where the one guy ate his own scab, I think out of just desperation.
See, I feel like I'd do that before I did something.
Right. Well, you're recycling essentially, right?
Reuse, reduce, recycle.
And they actually mentioned they were showing Starvation. Their urine was black.
That's never good.
No, yeah, ketosis, and they was just, no matter, even though they were hydrated, their body was just breaking everything down.
So I have a question. Did these folks, because it's a different country, so different knowledge, but were they aware of the U.S. Donner Party, which is also a historical cannibalism survival story?
I'm not sure. They don't mention that they spoke about it at all.
Okay. Because I'm part of me is wondering, is it just a natural instinct to say, I want to eat another human when you're in a desperate situation like that? Or had they heard other stories, not necessarily the Donner Party, but other stories just historically, oh, these people had to do this. So
I don't think so. It was very much a difficult decision for them. And I think it was
it's never an easy decision.
Yeah, I think it was just pure desperation. They just had no other choice at that point. So there were these cousins who were kind of the guys who were able to cut up the bodies. I don't remember why these two had the stomach for it, but they were the ones who were able to do it, and they did it out of sight of everybody else, and then they would just bring them little pieces of meat. So that at least got them to the point where they were nourished enough. They had the half of the plane that they were using for shelter, and they were trying to get seen. They did have planes flying over at some point, but when they were one of the trips that they were going up to try and get to this other half of the plane, they were fairly high up the mountain, and they looked down and they're we can't see the plane from here. If we can't see the remnants and where all the people are, the people up there can't see it. Yeah. Because it's such a complete whiteout, I think visibility is very, very poor. So let me get back to where I was. Okay. So then on day 17, an avalanche then strikes the crash site, which pulls the whole plane, all the people in it.
Any other problems
right.
At all.
Fills them with snow. And you see the scene, actually, the way they did it in this movie, where you just an arm coming out, the snow got in the plane, and trying to get themselves out, and then trying to dig the next person out, dig the next person out. It was like being underwater. They're just, coming up for air. And
that's essentially what it is in an avalanche. You're drowning.
Right. And so it ended up killing 8 more of the people on that avalanche.
Was this before or after eating?
Of course, because my notes aren't, I think it was after, from what I remember from the movie. It was from after.
Because
Right.
I'm sure like the people who were really struggling with it were like rationalizing like, okay, well, I can like live beyond this and survive, and then to get killed in that way is like the worst.
Right.
I mean, it's
And
all the worst. Let's just be clear. All
so
of
they
this is terrible.
they did end up getting eventually the other half of the plane and getting some more belongings from there. And there was some clothing. I think there might have been some wine and some chocolate, things like that. They did get this battery, and they were able to fashion the radio, at some point, just a regular radio, like not a transistor thing that they could hear them.
Mhm.
And they ended up hearing at day 30 that the search has been called off because the standard is 30 days.
That's devastating.
Yeah. So now they're like, okay, nobody's looking for us. So now we need to find a way to find people. Like that changed their perspective. We're not just sitting here trying to stay alive here.
Mm-hmm.
We need a way out, or we need a way to contact other people. So on day 34, another survivor died just from injuries, Arturo Noguera. And then on day 37, Rafael Echeverren dies, and we're down to 17 from 45. Day 60, Numa Turcati dies. Numa is played and focused on quite a bit in the movie, and he's the last death before sort of the next thing. 3 of them decide they're going to set out to try and trek basically west and hope that we keep walking until eventually we come to some civilization of some sort. So they actually fashioned sleeping bags out of some of the things they had, because now they weren't going to have the shelter of the plane. They didn't know how many days it was going to take. They took some food supplies with them, and they took this trek starting December 12th, 1972, which was day 61. So 61, 2 months they've been out there. So this was Nando Parado, Robert Canessa, and Antonio Vincentine. And then day 63, Antonio Vincentine actually returned to the crash site because they realized that they had limited food supply. And at this point, it wasn't going to make sense for 3 of them to continue in that direction. And on day 69, Parado and Canessa encounter a Chilean shepherd near a river, and he basically provides assistance and alerts authorities, which that's day 69, well over 2 months at this point. Rescue team does reach the crash site on day 71, and the first group is taken to safety. And then day 72, the rest. So a final count of survivors was 16 out of 45. So as we've touched on, some of the things they encountered: extreme cold, snow, high altitude, kind of the hopelessness. And there did show quite a bit of the mental struggle of this, because I mean, there's nothing you could imagine. The PTSD, I'm sure that they all have.
I'm just thinking, like, at the very least, kind of the sensory deprivation of being on a mountain where it's all white and
Yes.
the sun reflecting off the snow can be blinding. Like you said, snow blindness. You probably only hear each other. There's no other sounds other than wind. Like that alone can be really unsettling for a lot of people.
Right. So there's so many things that they encountered here. Of course, at the bottom here, it tells me that this is when the search was called off. I'm sorry, just rereading my little summary at the bottom here. Okay. So the aftermath, though, of course, at first none of them spoke about the cannibalism, but of course it did leak eventually. And it became a big part of the focus, which it shouldn't have been. That was one tool that they used to survive, but the amazing story of them coming together, and especially the young men who trekked out, to go find someone to rescue them. That's the real story here. And
but
the cannibalism,
there's like some sort of something in the human psyche that really attaches to these cannibalism stories, regardless of survival. It's just like this, like I think we've been talking about, like this moral question, like what would you do in that situation?
So interestingly enough, my sister-in-law brought this up, unrelated to this, at dinner, I don't know, at some point.
At dinner, that's the perfect time to talk about cannibalism.
And said, here's the question: if offered human meat, no strings attached, no laws, it's not someone you know, it is someone who just donated them their body to be eaten, you don't know anything about them, it's clean, it's purified, it's just another type of meat that is offered to you, would you try it just to taste it? So not in a survival situation, but just to taste it. Thoughts?
My immediate thought is I don't know. Like I don't have an immediate no or immediate yes. I don't know, but this is the thing, I don't know why I don't know, because we eat lots of other animals.
Right.
As babies, we drink breast milk. That is
right.
human fluid and things
Right.
like that. So it's like, I think, like I said, there's this whole moral, I'm sure there's some religious teachings about it as well. I feel like there's just so much tied up with it that it makes it very complicated. But if I tried to remove all of those kind of societal preconceptions / misconceptions, I guess maybe I would, if there wasn't like this outside pressure about it.
Right. I think so too. I think
you
I
wouldn't think
would.
about it. It wouldn't be a question anymore.
Right. So, I mean, that's the major crux of part of how it became such a media and really just a popularly known thing is the cannibalism.
Which is unfortunate because I feel like all that's laden with that is judgment.
Right.
It's not saying like, wow, look how brave they were that they could do this. It's like, oh, you ate somebody?
But this event is interesting. It's been studied in trauma medicine and survival psychology, as well as nutritional science, basically to understand, what they did and to learn from it. So it did have some impacts in that way. And for what I remember at the end, I believe on Morbid, they spoke about how they still get together. I don't know if it's once a year or how often the survivors, just because there's nobody else who has that bond and understands what they've been through, even though it's, how many years later, 50 something, over 50 years later, those, who are still alive still get together. If it was 50 years ago, some of them were in their 20s, so they're in their 70s now, probably most of the survivors.
Although I'm feeling like if you've been through something like that, cannibalism aside, if you've been through like the deepest, darkest parts of your life, you're going to need to stay in touch with those people because nobody else gets it.
Exactly. It's kind of like how they have like the VFWs for veterans. There's just nobody else who gets what you've been through. And so you kind of form your own little circle of who understands it. So, a couple of the things they encountered, I'll touch on the medical aspect. So of course, number one, hypothermia. That's a huge one. So that's a medical emergency when your body loses heat faster than it can produce it, and you can have a dangerously low body temperature. The definition in Fahrenheit will be below 95, and in Celsius it'd be 35 degrees. So to understand at what level,
mean nothing to me.
Celsius, yeah, I know.
Both of them mean nothing. I only know cold when I'm cold, and that could be 52
Well, no, your body's normally
be
98.6, right?
Right, but like when you say like, how does that feel? I don't know. Cold feels cold.
Right. I mean, but the thing is that your body's core temperature, it's only 3.5 degrees can be life or death. I mean, you think about that. And it can be from exposure to cold weather or immersion in cold water. And it's something that, obviously is studied because of military operations, other hiking things. People do need to understand it, how to avoid it, and what to do if they have signs of it. The management has changed over time. There's been advancements in guidelines and treatment protocols, but some early signs would be shivering, which of course we know. And then eventually that shivering can stop once the hypothermia worsens. You can eventually get slurred speech or mumbling, slow, shallow breathing, and then your pulse becomes weak. You can have clumsiness, lack of coordination, very lethargic, confused, and then eventual loss of consciousness. And in infants, apparently, their skin would be a bright red and cold. I'm not sure why it's not as pale. It's more bright red. But slow heart rate, low blood pressure, slow breathing, and then your pupils would dilate and you'd have decreased reflexes. And if it's untreated, you can go into a cardiac arrhythmia. I mean, it's a type of shock. We can have respiratory failure. And frostbite and gangrene we'll speak about separately because this is about your core body temperature, whereas that's more about specific.
Extremities.
Right, exactly. And of course, the more medical conditions you have and age are going to make you more susceptible to hypothermia. So somebody who is in more of a poor health would be more at risk than these younger, fit people who they were able to manage.
If this is a national rugby team, we're thinking these are men who are young at their prime, very fit.
Right.
So they were the best equipped to try to survive this, aside from injuries.
Of course, right. I mean, in some of them, of course, the entire plane crashed and was torn in half. So there were other physical injuries. But immediately, if someone you suspect has hypothermia, of course, move them out of the cold, remove any wet clothing, use blankets to warm them. You can apply warm but dry compresses to the neck, chest, or groin, and offer them warm beverages if they're conscious. If it is more of a medical emergency, then you would do passive external rewarming. So they have special rewarming blankets and heating devices, and they can also do warmed IV fluid. So that would be internal rewarming. So if you picture like putting that saline IV bag inside like a warming, and it's going to come into your body instead of at room temperature, which is colder than your body's temperature, it'll come in at a warmer, which will help with that. Sorry, I have a tickle. I think I have
You've got some human flesh in your throat.
a little coconut.
Oh, coconut. It's just some hair.
There we go. They'll be monitoring the vital signs, cardiac monitoring. And that would be usually like an ER and into ICU eventually if you had true hypothermia. So frostbite is a little different, and that's, like you said before, the extremities, right? So cold-induced injury when the skin and the underlying tissue freeze due to prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures. And the most severe form of this would result in actual permanent tissue damage, and that's where you can see fingers, toes, being not salvageable. Mm. I have a funny story, actually. I got a frostbite on my finger once, sort of. I don't know if it technically was frostbite, but it's the closest thing I've come to it. So I don't know if you remember back in the day, old freezers where you would have to like defrost them. They would have like that thick layer of like sort of frost on the inside. I was up at my grandfather's place in Michigan and filled some ice trays. And as I put it in, I guess some of the water spilled in my hand. And then when I put it down, my finger got frozen to the bottom of the freezer. Yeah. And I had to like yell for someone to pour warm water over it to unfreeze my finger, and sort of that top flesh of that finger. It did end up like turning sort of white and then gray. And then I think I had like a little sort of burn on it. I mean, my finger is fully intact at this point because it wasn't the tip. It was like sort of between the first and second knuckle on what we call the dorsal side, like that, not your palm side, but it was just a very random way to get frostbite.
It is very random.
But they don't have freezers like that anymore, so we're good.
They don't, probably for that reason and more.
So frostbite can happen. Typically, anything below freezing, it could happen. So 32 Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. Worsening would be if the wind chill, high moisture, a prolonged exposure, inadequate clothing or protection. And then things like alcohol use, smoking, or other like circulation conditions could make you more likely to have that. And then, of course, being immobile, mentally impaired, or exhausted in a cold environment. So, of course, their bodies were going through that where they probably couldn't move around a lot. And that would put them more at risk because you're not making that blood circulate. So what body parts do we think are most susceptible?
Fingers and toes. And the tip of your nose.
Yes, so fingers and hands, toes and feet, nose, ears. We can't forget those. Cheeks and chin. But I'm going to add one to that list. If you're not dressed.
Genitalia.
Yeah, the penis. It sticks out there.
And your nipulars.
Yes, true. I mean, so one of the things we learn in school is not to give epinephrine, which is a vasoconstrictor. So sometimes when you're numbing something to suture it, you will have epinephrine mixed with the lidocaine because it stops blood flow so that you can numb it and then you can suture it without like a bloody site, and it'd be a nice, easy way to suture it. But they always told us fingers, toes, penis, and nose are the places you don't put that because you don't want to constrict blood flow there.
So it's the same solid
concept.
Advice.
It's the same concept. Although I think now they say it's okay to use epinephrine there. I don't know. I'm old school. I go by the chant that I learned. Well, no epi in those spots.
Neither of us have that to protect, so I think we're in the clear.
Yeah. And I would say most of the time that area is going to be protected by clothing and just warmth of your like legs and thighs and things. But you never know. So frostbite has a few stages. So very, very early be frost nip, red or pale skin. See, we said nip. It works.
Frost nippies. Got it.
Red, pale skin, numbness or tingling, but there's no permanent tissue damage with that. Then there's superficial frostbite where the skin turns pale or white and ice crystals may form. Blistering may occur after rewarming, and the tissue will remain soft beneath the surface. So I think that's probably what I had. Mm-hmm. And then deep frostbite is muscles, tendons, and bone can be affected.
That sounds much more painful.
Yes. The skin becomes waxy, blue, or black. And then eventually they get a loss of sensation because the tissue may die. So if you think about a burn, so the complete opposite, a 3rd degree burn tends to not be as painful because you've actually damaged the nerves. whereas a first or second degree can hurt like hell. So same concept. Once you get down deeper into the tissue, you actually lose some of that sensation.
Yeah.
Complications, blistering. So similar to burns, pain and swelling during that rewarming when you're trying to warm them back up. It hurts worse. And then they could eventually have permanent numbness or chronic pain. Eventually you can get an infection, gangrene. You might require amputations. So not fun. Keep your feet and your hands warm.
And your peen.
And your nips.
Keep everything warm and covered, especially when you're in the snow.
Exactly. So in order to rewarm the person for this, you would want to put the affected areas in warm but not hot water. So somewhere between 98.6 to 102.2 Fahrenheit or 37 to 39 Celsius. And you actually want moist heat in this, not dry heat. So it's kind of the opposite of hypothermia. Of course, pain management. If this is a severe case, you're going to need to manage their pain, tetanus, prophylaxis.
Pain management.
Yes,
like, what?
It's pain on the mind, apparently.
How are we managing the peens? Not well, apparently.
And then some of these, if they're having severe systemic problems because, say, they need a toe, foot, whatever, amputated, they may require like ICU admission and things like that.
Oh, yeah, I would assume so. Especially, I would assume that if it's to that level, you probably have frostbite on multiple regions. So it's not like they're just addressing one
area.
Yeah. Right.
And then, of course, follow-up would be wound care and definitely physical therapy for whichever areas were affected.
Yeah.
And then, the psychological support for impacts on the disfigurement, losing limbs or losing digits, can be mentally taxing.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about starvation.
No.
I've been very lucky to never have starved in my life.
Never.
So acute malnutrition is defined by rapid weight loss, muscle and fat wasting, and nutritional deficiencies that eventually impair your bodily functions. We use your BMI to calculate. So we know that that BMI is what defines if you're underweight, normal weight, overweight, obesity, morbid obesity. But when it comes to a survival situation like this, it's very different than a chronic malnutrition. This is an acute malnutrition. Mm-hmm. So it does act a bit differently. So we're not talking about a child who doesn't eat, or even children maybe in third world countries who have poor access to food, because that's more on a chronic scale. This is definitely where your body's actively catabolizing itself. It really is
feeding off
devouring
your
itself.
Your tissues. Yeah. I'm just thinking, this is not at all related, but when I had gastric bypass, I lost weight very quickly. And one of the side effects of that was gallstones. And so I'm thinking, we're not just worried about the initial starvation. It's what damage is then done to the body after, if these people are okay to survive.
Right. I mean, they're going into acute ketosis, which can throw off your electrolytes significantly. Particularly, there's different kinds of malnutrition that we kind of learn in the book. So marasmus is basically all calorie intake, that's the definition of that type of malnutrition. And kwashiorkor is specifically protein deficiency, but with adequate calories. They would be combined. They would be the mixed type because they're having severe calorie deficit and severe protein deficit. And, essentially it can take, let me see how many days. I believe I wrote it somewhere, but of course.
Probably not as long as we think.
Yeah, I believe it's 14, but of course my notes are not as organized. ChatGPT and I are getting divorced.
You should.
It did not organize it in the way that I instructed it to organize it.
Well, I'm sure the hubby is very upset about this extracurricular experience you're having. But I just had something to pop in my head about that. Crap, it popped back out. It was something about some other media piece that talks about starvation that was not Yellow Jackets or one of those other shows. Oh, I can't remember it now.
That's all right.
It'll come to me.
But essentially, an acute situation like this, they made the right choice. They had to, or else they wouldn't survive. Typically, in the very beginning timeline, days to weeks, they're just going to have weakness and that weight loss. And then further in, weeks and weeks in, they're going to have muscle and fat wasting and diminished physical ability to do things.
I just remembered, which maybe you can cover in an upcoming episode because it will connect to your starvation here. It was based on a true story, but it's a movie about a woman who claims to have not eaten for months and is surviving purely on air and religious ecstasy, which the movie, I think, like debunks it, but I've heard other stories about that in the past. I know for a little while it was a trend about being on the air diet. So maybe that's something you can cover in an upcoming episode.
That definitely sounds like a good one to cover. Absolutely. The thing is, a lot of what I found source-wise for this are going to be more either about chronic malnutrition because of lack of resources, or typically in a hospital setting, patients who aren't eating and then they need some sort of artificial nutrition or something like that. There's not a lot about survival starvation out there because it's not something you can study per se. But in the end, the result is you're going to have delayed wound healing. You're more at risk of hypothermia, which they already were, anemia, electrolyte imbalances. You eventually can get swelling in your feet and legs because of what we call third spacing. So when you have a lack of protein circulating, proteins help your fluids to stay sort of in the right compartments, if that makes sense. So your fluids will migrate to places that they shouldn't be. If you think about, it's very hard to describe, but like somebody with liver damage has something called ascites because they get that fluid in their belly. But basically they're third spacing. They're having fluids go to the tissues and not intravascularly because of that imbalance of protein. And eventually hair starts falling out, skin starts peeling off. I mean, everything can continue to break down. Your body's going to prioritize your organs. And so all the extras like hair and nails and skin just sort of go. All right. So, of course, that's, again, refeeding. Refeeding actually after someone who has anorexia or certain things like that can be like an actual process because you can't just immediately feed them again. Their GI tract isn't going to work the same. And there is a lot more to it. But recovery is possible. But obviously untreated or late stage can have more permanent consequences. Lastly, let's talk about cannibalism.
Let's talk about it.
So, in and of itself...
I don't have any snacks to eat while I'm talking about it.
In and of itself, cannibalism by itself, eating human flesh versus cow flesh versus pork versus chicken versus whatever, is not dangerous in it of itself.
Well, and we are not the only species who has eaten our own kind.
Right.
Actually, we're probably one of the only species that doesn't typically eat our own kind.
Right. The problem comes, and there are some insular populations or communities where there have been diseases, though, because of this.
And I know one of the ones you're going to talk about, but the one that's the more psychological.
Well, they're both they actually both are prion diseases. So you definitely know about these. Kuru.
Yeah, that was the one I was thinking about.
You're thinking the other one. That's going to be mentioned as well. So Kuru is a fatal neurodegenerative disorder, and it was prevalent among the Foray people of Papua New Guinea because of ritualistic consumption of human brain tissue. And so in and of itself, in a survival situation, it's not likely that somebody's carrying Kuru.
But it's also, I'm thinking in like a survival situation, by the time you get to eat in the brain, like you're probably not going to survive very much longer anyway. Like that's not the first body part you're going to go to.
Right. But this was in that particular community, part of their ritual. So of course it became a big thing because the next person had it and the next person had it. And then they're just spreading it. And then the one you're speaking of is the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is transmitted through consumption of infected human tissue and rapid neurodegeneration and death. And, we've heard about it in cows as well.
Mad cow disease.
Yes. So those would be the major concerns, but in and of itself, it is a nutritious protein source, just like any other meat. Mm-hmm. So the major concern would be that the transmission of infectious disease. There are other things.
Does it taste like chicken?
I don't know.
We'll
have to try. Who wants to volunteer?
I can't believe with all of these stories, no one's made a comment about it tasted like blank.
Yeah, I think there's too much shame. They're too scared to talk about it. And of course you have to worry about whatever toxins the person may have had or, things like that. Organ meats, like things like your liver are going to have probably higher concentrations of some of those. So I'd probably avoid the liver if you can.
And then we don't even know what temperature you cook human meat to its safe.
No,
There's so many
logistical
issues.
They were doing pretty much
searing it.
No, they had no fire. They had nothing to burn.
Oh, they were eating it raw.
It was in the cold. It was cold.
In my head.
Yeah, I mean,
raw. Sorry, I'm so inappropriate today.
But they didn't even have fire this whole time. Think about that.
I guess I took that for granted. I knew, but I guess it didn't click in my head.
Yeah. So of course the legal implications is what holds most people back from this. Apparently, cannibalism is illegal in most jurisdictions. It's more, if we hear about it being prosecuted, it's because of murder, a desecration of a corpse,
Which
serial killer.
But as we know, all rules and laws happen because somebody did something dumb once. So I'm well, who was the first person?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Their signs don't get off a moving train because some idiot did it. So
right.
Who? That's for another day.
Yeah. I mean, remember Jeffrey Dahmer, serial killer.
But this was around far before he was. And
yes, of course, cannibalism's been around forever.
Well, and I will say, because I love my serial killers, that he was one of the ones who did commit cannibalism intentionally. Some of them have a delusion, if I eat this person, X, Y, and Z will happen, where he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't delusional in that part of it.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So, there are some challenges in forensics detection and prosecution. It can be challenging understanding, now analyzing the remains, understanding cultural context, that kind of a thing. And like we said, in some societies, cannibalism was part of rituals and believed to honor the dead or deceased and to absorb their qualities, essentially. And then, as we just obviously talked about this whole time, survival cannibalism, is really probably where we would see it, I guess, more often. And then, as we touched on the ethical debate, if it's taboo, if it's morals and ethics, it's all, I guess, dependent on context, right?
And I think some of the judgments that at least we have in our society is, well, there's got to be other things to eat. And so it's kind of taking out that thought process of how so many people suffer from food insecurity, not to that level where they have to eat other people, but there's this assumption well, you could have done something else.
Right.
It's well, that's, putting your own morality on what someone else's survival is.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I got for you. Cannibalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is a truly extraordinary story. I do recommend watching that movie and listening to the Morbid episode because they did a great job with it as well. And especially specifically naming and honoring all of the important people who helped them get to being rescued. So it was pretty, it was a pretty interesting story. And this movie was well done. It was very realistic. It was grueling, but it was interesting. It was very interesting.
Yeah. And I am going to send you all of those links to that other story I was just
Yes, Living on Air.
It's a whole thing. I feel once you go down this rabbit hole, you're going to be obsessed. You're oh my God, I have to cover this. So.
Oh no, I'm scared.
No, it's good.
There's something else my hairdresser told me about that we have to look up. The Liver King?
Yes, I watched that.
Okay. I have to look that up.
3 episodes on Netflix, similar to Tiger King, but not so much. And honestly, it seemed more bizarre than it actually was. Once you start watching it, you're oh, okay.
Right. Yeah. So she told me the whole idea. So
yeah, and it's only 3 episodes. So you can watch that
easily. All right. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the way we're doing things now. We're still almost at an hour because we like to talk, but I feel like we aren't rushing. We were able to have a little more flow. So I like that part of it.
I got to be highly inappropriate.
Yes. Talk about nips and peens.
Yeah.
As she just quietly takes a sip of her drink.
I was going to say, a day does not go by when we don't talk about a nip or a peen. I mean, you in the medical field, me, not as much, but,
I mean, I try only if necessary.
If necessary. Your primary care, you should be able to service all areas.
I do.
Not service,
Service.
Treat all areas.
Yes, I don't service anybody.
Don't service any areas. But you should treat them.
Oh my goodness. All right, people. Yeah. So hit us up on our socials, Medical Media Mixer podcast, on everything, all of them.
Yes. You can shoot us an email to medicalmediamixer@gmail.com. And we're on Pinterest, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok.
TikTok, yes. The ticker and the ticker.
It was Instacart. No, we're not there yet.
Not driving around shopping.
No, we're not bringing cocktails to your home.
No, that would be cool. You know, there was a company that did deliver liquor, and they had a class action suit and got shut down. Drizzly.
Yeah, I remember them.
I used them during the pandemic for sure.
Yeah. Well, during the pandemic, a lot of my local places would deliver.
Interesting. All right, ladies and gents, thank you for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail. Cheers.
Cheers.